I didn't expect the silence to be the hardest part. Not the divorce papers, not the shouting matches, not even the moment I found out about him. It was what came after. All that empty space where a life used to be. For 15 years, my world had a rhythm. Wake up next to her, make coffee while she scrolled her phone, argue about dumb things like whose turn it was to take out the trash, kiss her goodbye even when we were annoyed at each other. That kind of normal you don't even notice until it's gone. Then one day, it was just gone. Her name is Lauren, or I guess it still is. Saying my ex-wife still feels unreal, like I'm talking about someone else's life. But no, this is mine. This is what I lived through. We met when we were 23. She had this energy that made everything feel bigger than it was. Louder, brighter, more exciting. I was quieter, more grounded, and for a long time, that balance worked. Or at least I thought it did. We built something real. A house in a suburb outside Denver, 2 cars in the driveway, a dog that somehow loved her more even though I was the one feeding it every day. No kids, something we always said we'd get to, eventually. That word stretched out for years until it stopped coming up altogether. If I'm being honest, things had been off for a while before I knew why. It wasn't one big change. It was 100 tiny ones. She stopped laughing at my dumb jokes, started keeping her phone face down. Late nights at work that didn't quite add up. The kind of stuff you notice but push down because you don't want to be that paranoid husband. I told myself I was imagining it, that this was just what marriage looks like after a decade. Less spark, more routine. Everyone says that, right? But there was this feeling in my gut I couldn't shake, like something was slipping out of my hands, and I didn't even know what it was yet. The night everything cracked open wasn't dramatic in the way you'd expect. No screaming, no catching her in bed with someone. It was quieter than that. She had fallen asleep on the couch, TV still playing some reality she loved. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. Once, then again. I wasn't even trying to snoop. I swear to God I wasn't. But it kept lighting up, over and over, like whoever it was really needed her attention. So I looked. That one decision split my life in half. The message on the screen just said, "Miss you already." No name, just a number. I stood there for a second, staring at it like maybe it would explain itself if I gave it enough time, like there was some harmless context I was missing. There wasn't. I wish I could say I put the phone down and confronted her like a normal person, but I didn't. I opened it. And yeah, she hadn't changed the passcode. Same one she'd used for years. Our anniversary, which suddenly felt like a joke. The messages went back months, not weeks, months. At first it was flirty, inside jokes, compliments, the kind of stuff you could almost convince yourself wasn't crossing a line yet. But it didn't stay there. It turned into something else, something deeper, more intimate. Plans, memories, things they'd done together. There were photos too. Not explicit, but close enough. The kind of pictures she used to send me when we were younger, back when we still had that spark. I remember sitting down on the edge of the couch, my hand shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. 15 years, and this is how it ends? With a stranger texting my wife that he misses her? I didn't wake her up right away. I just sat there, scrolling, reading pieces of a relationship I didn't even know existed. His name was Eric. Of course it was something normal like Eric, not some cartoon villain name that would make this easier to process. Just a regular guy, who at some point became more important to my wife than I was. They worked together. That much was clear. Same office, same team. I kept thinking about all those late nights she said she had, all the time she came home exhausted, barely speaking, going straight to bed. She wasn't working late. She was with him. When I finally woke her up, it wasn't dramatic. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the phone at her or demand answers. I just said her name. Lauren. She opened her eyes slowly, disoriented. What? I held up the phone, and I watched her face change. That moment, that exact second when she realized I knew, that's burned into my brain. The confusion fading, replaced by something else. Not panic, not even guilt at first. Resignation, like she'd been expecting this. She sat up slowly, rubbing her face. Didn't even try to grab the phone for me. How long? I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. Too calm, too steady. She hesitated, just for a second. About 8 months. 8 months. I let that number sit between us, like something physical. You were going to tell me? I asked. Another pause, longer this time. I didn't know how. That answer, it broke something in me. Not because it was cruel, but because it was weak, empty, like she couldn't even respect me enough to come up with a real lie. So you just kept going, I said, coming home, acting like everything was normal? She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "It wasn't like that." I almost laughed. "It literally is exactly like that." She stood up then, pacing a little, like she needed space to think, or maybe just space from me. "It just happened," she said. "We started talking more at work, and it doesn't just happen," I cut in. "You don't accidentally have an 8-month affair." She flinched at that word, affair, like it sounded worse out loud than it did in her head. "I didn't plan it," she said. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, I felt like I didn't know this person at all. "Are you in love with him?" I asked. That question hung there longer than anything else, because this was the real one. This was the one that mattered. She didn't say no, and that told me everything. "I think I might be," she said quietly. That was it. No explosion, no dramatic collapse, just a quiet, irreversible shift. I remember nodding, like I was processing something logical instead of watching my entire life fall apart. "Okay," I said, and I meant it. Not in a forgiving way, not in a "we'll work through this" way. Just, okay, this is real. This is happening. We didn't sleep in the same bed that night, or ever again after that. The next few weeks were a blur of logistics and emotional whiplash. Lawyers, paperwork, conversations that felt like business transactions instead of the ending of a marriage. She moved out faster than I expected, like she was already halfway gone before I even knew there was a problem. I stayed in the house, at least for a while. It felt wrong being there alone, but I didn't know where else to go. Everything reminded me of her. The coffee mugs, the couch, the stupid throw pillows she insisted on buying. Even the dog kept looking at the door like he expected her to walk back in. I kept thinking she might, not because I believed she would, but because part of me couldn't catch up to reality yet. Then one night, about a month after she moved out, I saw something that finally snapped me out of that illusion. It was on social media. A picture of her and him, Eric. They were at some rooftop bar downtown, city lights behind them, both smiling like they didn't have a care in the world.
Her head was tilted toward his, the way she used to do with me. The caption said, "Finally." That word hit harder than anything else. Finally. Like I was just something she had to get through before she could get to the life she actually wanted. I stared at that picture for a long time, longer than I should have. Then I closed the app, sat in that too quiet house, and realized something I hadn't fully accepted until that moment. She wasn't coming back, not even a little. And whatever we had, it didn't end when I found those messages. It had already been over for a long time. I was just the last one to know. I didn't block her right away. That probably sounds pathetic, but I kept telling myself it was for practical reasons. We still had things to sort out. Bank accounts, the house, paperwork. That was the excuse I used. The truth was simpler. I wasn't ready to fully let go of the version of her that still existed in my head. So I kept seeing things I shouldn't have. Little updates, stories, pictures. Every one of them felt like a punch I willingly walked into. At first, it was subtle, just glimpses. A glass of wine across from someone's face wasn't fully in frame, a hand on the table that clearly wasn't mine, a tagged location I knew she'd never gone to with me. Then it got less subtle. A weekend trip, the two of them hiking somewhere with those matching smiles people have when they think they've found something real. There was this ease between them in the photos, no tension, no distance. It looked effortless. That was the part that got under my skin. Because with us, toward the end, everything felt like work, like we were constantly adjusting, compromising, navigating around something we couldn't quite name. But with him, she looked free. I'd sit there staring at my phone, trying to figure out when I became the weight she needed to drop. I replayed everything in my head, conversations, arguments, the slow drift that I ignored because I thought it was temporary. Was I boring? Too predictable? Not ambitious enough? Too comfortable? You start asking yourself questions like that when someone you built your life with replaces you like you were nothing. And yeah, I know people say it's not that simple, that cheating says more about them than you, but that doesn't stop your brain from going there. The divorce process itself was almost insultingly clean.
No huge fights over money, no drawn-out battles. We split things pretty evenly. Sold the house, divided the accounts, signed the papers. It felt like dismantling a business, not ending a marriage. There was one moment, though, that stuck with me. We were sitting across from each other in the lawyer's office, going through the final documents. Just the two of us and this guy who had probably seen 100 couples like us. Lauren looked calm, focused, like she was just checking items off a list. At one point, the lawyer stepped out to grab something, and it was just us in that room. Silence. I remember looking at her and thinking, this is probably the last time we'll ever sit like this. So, that's it? I said. She nodded. Yeah. No emotion, no hesitation. I wanted to ask her something real, something that actually mattered, but everything felt either too late or too pointless. Still, I tried. Did you ever think about not doing it? I asked. About stopping before it got this far? She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a second I saw something flicker. Not regret exactly, but something close. I did, she said. And? She hesitated. I didn't want to lose what I had with him. That answer settled in my chest like something heavy and permanent. Not, I didn't want to hurt you. Not, I didn't want to destroy our marriage. Just, I didn't want to lose him. That told me everything I needed to know about where I stood. I nodded again, because that's what I seemed to do a lot back then. Just accept things as they came, even when they tore through me. Got it, I said, and that was the closest we ever came to closure. After the divorce was finalized, things moved even faster than I expected. I thought there'd be some kind of transition period, time for her to figure things out, time for reality to set in. There wasn't. 2 weeks after everything was official, she posted another picture. This one wasn't subtle at all. She was standing next to Eric, both of them dressed up. He had his arm around her waist and she was holding up her left hand. Ring, a different one than the one I gave her. The caption said, "Best decision of my life." I remember feeling this weird mix of emotions all at once. Anger, obviously, but also disbelief, confusion. 2 weeks. That's all it took for her to go from married to me to engaged to him. 15 years reduced to a waiting period. I actually laughed when I saw it, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd I didn't know how else to react. Like, what does that even mean? Was she planning this the whole time? Were they talking about marriage while she was still living with me? Sleeping next to me? The timeline started twisting in my head, and none of it made sense in a way that felt fair. I closed the app again, but this time I didn't reopen it. That was the moment I finally blocked her. Not out of anger, not as some dramatic statement, just self-preservation. Because I realized something I probably should have understood earlier. Every time I looked at her life now, I was reopening a wound that wasn't even starting to heal yet. So I cut it off. No more updates, no more glimpses into whatever version of happiness she thought she'd found. Just silence. And at first, that silence was unbearable. The house was gone by then. I'd sold it as part of the divorce, took my half, and moved into a small apartment on the other side of the city. It didn't feel like home. It felt like a place I was temporarily existing in while I figured out what came next. Every night, I'd sit there with the TV on, not really watching anything, just trying to fill the space. Friends reached out. Some of them knew what happened, some didn't. I told the story a few times, each version a little shorter than the last. You get tired of explaining your pain after a while. Work became this weird anchor, something predictable, something I could control. But even there it felt different, like I was moving through everything slightly detached, watching my own life from the outside. And then came the wedding. I didn't find out about it directly, obviously. It was my friend Jason who told me. He called one evening, sounding hesitant. "Hey man, I don't know if you've seen anything or if you even want to know, but that's how those conversations always start." I almost told him to stop, to not finish that sentence, but I didn't. "What?" I said. He paused. "She got married." I leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. "How long?" I asked. "Like, last weekend." I did the math in my head without meaning to. Divorce finalized, 2 weeks later, engagement, and now, a wedding. It hadn't even been 3 months. 3 months. "That's fast," I said. "Yeah," he replied carefully. "I thought so too." There was more he wanted to say. I could hear it in his voice, but he didn't push. "Are you okay?" he asked. I thought about it for a second. "No," I said, "but I will be." And for the first time since everything started falling apart, I actually meant that. After the divorce was finalized, things moved even faster than I expected. I thought there'd be some kind of transition period, time for her to figure things out, time for reality to set in. There wasn't. 2 weeks after Ivan was official, she posted another picture. This one wasn't subtle at all. She was standing next to Eric, both of them dressed up. He had his arm around her waist and she was holding up her left hand. Ring. A different one than the one I gave her. The caption said, "Best decision of my life." I remember feeling this weird mix of emotions all at once. Anger, obviously, but also disbelief, confusion. 2 weeks. That's all it took for her to go from married to me to engaged to him. 15 years reduced to a waiting period. I actually laughed when I saw it, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd I didn't know how else to react. Like, what does that even mean? Was she planning this the whole time? Were they talking about marriage while she was still living with me? Sleeping next to me? The timeline started twisting in my head, and none of it made sense in a way that felt fair. I closed the app again, but this time I didn't reopen it. That was the moment I finally blocked her. Not out of anger, not as some dramatic statement, just self-preservation. Because I realized something I probably should have understood earlier. Every time I looked at her life now, I was reopening a wound that wasn't even starting to heal yet. So I cut it off. No more updates, no more glimpses into whatever version of happiness she thought she'd found. Just silence. And at first, that silence was unbearable. The house was gone by then. I'd sold it as part of the divorce, took my half, and moved into a small apartment on the other side of the city. It didn't feel like home. It felt like a place I was temporarily existing in while I figured out what came next. Every night, I'd sit there with the TV on, not really watching anything, just trying to fill the space. Friends reached out. Some of them knew what happened, some didn't. I told the story a few times, each version a little shorter than the last. You get tired of explaining your pain after a while. Work became this weird anchor, something predictable, something I could control. But even there it felt different, like I was moving through everything slightly detached, watching my own life from the outside. And then came the wedding. I didn't find out about it directly, obviously. It was my friend Jason who told me. He called one evening, sounding hesitant. "Hey man, I don't know if you've seen anything or if you even want to know, but that's how those conversations always start." I almost told him to stop, to not finish that sentence, but I didn't. "What?" I said. He paused. "She got married." I leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. "How long?" I asked. "Like, last weekend." I did the math in my head without meaning to. Divorce finalized, 2 weeks later, engagement, and now, a wedding. It hadn't even been 3 months. 3 months. "That's fast," I said. "Yeah," he replied carefully. I thought so too. There was more he wanted to say. I could hear it in his voice, but he didn't push. "Are you okay?" he asked. I thought about it for a second. "No," I said, "but I will be." And for the first time since everything started falling apart, I actually meant that.
Because something about that news, about how fast she moved, how completely she replaced me, it finally broke whatever lingering attachment I had left. Not in a dramatic, explosive way, just clean, like cutting a rope that had been fraying for months. That was the moment I stopped seeing her as my wife in any sense. She wasn't mine. She hadn't been for a while. And whatever she had now, whatever life she jumped into with him, that was hers. Not my problem. Not my story anymore. At least that's what I told myself. But letting go mentally is one thing. Figuring out what to do with your life after everything you built disappears, that's something else entirely. I started thinking about leaving, not just the apartment, not just the city, everything. Denver held too much history, too many places that reminded me of what used to be. Restaurants we used to go to, streets we used to walk, even the grocery store felt loaded with memories. I wanted something clean, something completely new. And the idea started small. Just a thought at first. What if I went somewhere else for a while? Then it grew. What if I didn't come back? I had some savings from the house sale. My job was remote friendly, at least temporarily. There wasn't anything really tying me down anymore. No wife, no house, no shared future plans, nothing. And for the first time, that didn't just feel like loss. It felt like possibility. I remember sitting at my kitchen counter one night, laptop open, scrolling through places I'd never seriously considered before. Cities in Europe, coastal towns, places where nobody knew me, where I wasn't the guy whose wife left him for someone else. Just a guy, starting over. It sounded insane, but also exactly like what I needed.
So I started looking into it seriously. Visas, cost of living, time zones, internet speed, because apparently that mattered now more than anything else. The more I researched, the more real it started to feel. And the more real it felt, the less scared I became. Because staying where I was, that felt worse. Staying meant being surrounded by ghosts of a life that didn't exist anymore. Leaving meant at least giving myself a chance to build something new. I didn't tell many people about it at first, just Jason. "You're serious?" he asked when I brought it up. "Yeah," I said. "I think I need this." He nodded slowly. "Honestly, I get it." That was all the validation I needed, so I made the decision. I was leaving, not just the city, the country. And I had no idea at the time that the moment I stepped on that plane, everything I thought I understood about my past and my ex-wife was about to get a whole lot more complicated. I didn't tell Lauren I was leaving the country, not out of spite or some dramatic need to disappear. There just wasn't a reason to. We weren't in each other's lives anymore. No shared responsibilities, no lingering conversations. Whatever we had ended clean on paper, even if it didn't feel clean inside my head. So I packed up what mattered, sold what didn't, and reduced 15 years of a life down to a couple of suitcases and a carry-on. It's strange how quickly everything becomes just stuff. Furniture we argued over, pictures we once cared about, little things that used to feel like pieces of a shared identity. When it comes time to leave, most of it doesn't make the cut. I remember holding this framed photo of us from a trip to California years ago. We were standing on a beach, wind in her hair, both of us squinting into the sun like idiots. We looked happy, not staged happy, real. For a second, I almost packed it. Then I set it back down and left it leaning against the wall with everything else I was getting rid of. Not because I hated her, but because I didn't want to carry that version of us into whatever came next. The flight itself felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. Sitting there in a cramped seat, staring out the window as the ground disappeared, knowing there was no real plan waiting for me on the other side. Just a place I picked because it looked like the kind of city where you could disappear and start over. Lisbon. I didn't have some deep connection to it. I hadn't always dreamed of living there. It just checked the right boxes. Affordable enough, good weather, walkable, far enough away from everything I knew that it felt like a clean break. And maybe that's what I needed more than anything, a place that had no memory of me. The first few weeks were quiet, not in a depressing way, just unfamiliar. Different language, different rhythms, different everything. I spent a lot of time walking, exploring streets with no destination, sitting in cafes where nobody knew my name, listening to conversations I didn't fully understand. It was lonely, yeah, but it was a different kind of lonely. Back in Denver, loneliness felt like something was missing. Here, it felt like something hadn't been built yet. There's a difference. I found a small apartment in an older building with creaky floors and a view of a narrow street that was always just a little too loud at night. It wasn't anything special, but it was mine. No shared memories, no echoes of a past life. Work helped. Keeping a routine, logging in during weird hours because of the time difference, pretending like everything was normal when I was on calls with people who had no idea I'd just blown up my entire life. I didn't talk about it much. Not to coworkers, not to the few people I started meeting. When you're somewhere new, you get to decide what parts of your story you share, and I wasn't ready to be the guy whose wife cheated and remarried in 3 months. So I kept it simple. I just needed a change. That was enough for most people. There was this bar a few blocks from my apartment that I started going to a couple nights a week. Nothing fancy, just a place where the bartender remembered your drink if you showed up often enough. That's where I met Daniel, American, early 40s. Been living there for a couple years already. The kind of guy who talked like he'd seen a lot but didn't feel the need to prove it. We started talking over something random, sports, I think, and it just kept going from there. There's something easy about connecting with another American in a foreign city. You don't have to explain certain things. The way you talk, the references, the humor, it just clicks faster. After a couple drinks, he asked me the question everyone eventually asks. "So what brought you out here?" I hesitated for a second, then gave him the short version. Divorce. He nodded like he'd heard that story before. "That'll do it." "Yeah. She cheat or you just get tired of each other?" he asked, completely casual. I let out a small breath. "She cheated." He took a sip of his drink. That's usually the one that gets people on a plane. There was no pity in his tone, no awkwardness, just understanding. "Something like that," I said. We didn't go deeper into it that night, and I appreciated that. But over the next few weeks, we hung out more. Drinks, random dinners, just exploring the city. And slowly, pieces of the story came out. Not all at once, just enough to fill in the gaps. And for a while, that was enough. I started building something that almost felt like a life again. A routine, familiar places, a couple of people I could text if I didn't feel like being alone. It wasn't what I had before, but it wasn't empty anymore either.
Then, one night, everything shifted again. It started with something small. Daniel and I were at the bar, a couple drinks in, talking about nothing important. The place was busier than usual, a mix of locals and expats, the kind of noise that makes everything feel a little less serious. At some point, he mentioned work, something about a client he used to have back in the States. Tech company out of Colorado, he said. Whole thing was a mess. That caught my attention just enough. Colorado, I said. Yeah, Denver area. I felt something tighten slightly in my chest, but I kept my tone casual. I'm from there. No kidding, he said. Small world. Yeah, what company? He waved his hand a little. Doesn't matter, I wasn't there long, but there was some drama, office stuff, you know how it goes. Normally, I would have let it go. It wasn't that unusual. Denver's not a tiny city, but it's not massive either. Overlaps happen. But then he added something without thinking. There was this whole thing with 2 coworkers hooking up. Guy left his wife for her, or maybe the other way around. I don't remember exactly. My stomach dropped. It wasn't immediate panic. It was slower than that, like a realization creeping in from the edges. What were their names? I asked, trying to sound like I was just mildly curious. He shrugged. Man, I don't remember the guy's name. Eric, maybe? Something like that. Everything in me went still. And the woman? I asked. He thought for a second. Lauren, I think. That was it. That moment. The noise of the bar faded out just enough for everything to feel too clear. Yeah, he continued, completely unaware. It was messy. People talked about it a lot. Apparently they started something while she was still married. Then it blew up and suddenly they were together full time. Whole office knew. I didn't say anything right away. I just sat there, staring at my drink, trying to process what I was hearing. Because this wasn't just my story anymore. This was public. Not in a viral social media way, but in that quieter, more humiliating way, where people who had nothing to do with your life were still talking about it, judging it, filling in details, creating their own version of what happened. They got married pretty fast too, from what I heard, Daniel added. Like, really fast. People thought it was weird. I let out a slow breath. Yeah, I said quietly, that does sound weird. He glanced at me then, something in my tone finally catching his attention. You good? He asked. I looked up at him. That's my ex-wife, I said. The shift in his expression was immediate. Wait, seriously? Yeah, I said. Lauren, Eric, Denver, that's them. He leaned back slightly, processing it. Man, I'm sorry, he said. I didn't know. I know, I replied. It's fine. But it wasn't fine. Not really. Because hearing it like that, from someone completely outside the situation, changed something. Up until that moment, everything I knew was from my perspective, my experience, what I saw, what I felt. But now there was another layer, what it looked like from the outside. And it wasn't just a private betrayal anymore. It was a story people told, a situation people watched unfold in real time. And the more I sat with that, the more something started to bother me. Not the fact that people knew, but the way he described it, because something didn't line up. Did you hear anything else about them? I asked. Daniel frowned slightly. Like what? I don't know, just anything. How it started. How long it had been going on. He thought for a second, then shook his head. Not really, just that it caused a lot of tension. Some people were on her side, some weren't. Typical office drama. I nodded slowly, but my mind was already moving. Because I knew the timeline she gave me. 8 months. That's what she said when I confronted her. 8 months of an affair. But if people at work were already talking about it, if it was enough of a situation to become drama, that didn't feel like something that just started quietly and stayed hidden. That felt bigger, messier, longer. And for the first time since I got on that plane, I felt that old pull again, that need to understand what actually happened. Not the version she gave me, not the version I tried to accept, the truth. Because something about all of this suddenly felt incomplete, like I had only been told part of the story. And I didn't know yet if finding out the rest was going to give me closure or make everything worse. I didn't sleep much that night. After Daniel left, I walked back to my apartment through streets that suddenly didn't feel as peaceful as they had a few hours earlier. Same narrow alleys, same dim lights, same late-night voices echoing off old buildings. But my head was somewhere else entirely. Back in Denver. Back in that house. Back in every moment I thought I understood. I kept replaying what he said over and over again. It caused a lot of tension. People talked about it. That doesn't sound like something that stayed hidden. Because it didn't. And that meant one thing I hadn't fully let myself consider before. She didn't just have an affair. She had an invisible affair. At work. Around people. In a space where both of them existed every day. That doesn't happen overnight. That doesn't stay secret for 8 months and then suddenly explode. That grows. That builds. That gets noticed. Which meant the timeline she gave me probably wasn't real. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone, fighting the urge to do something I knew might drag me right back into everything I had tried to leave behind. I had blocked her,
That line was clear, but there were other ways to find things out. Mutual connections, old coworkers, people I hadn't talked to in months. I told myself I didn't care anymore, that I had moved on, that whatever happened between them didn't affect my life now. But that wasn't entirely true, because there's a difference between letting go and realizing you were lied to in ways you didn't even understand yet. Around 2 a.m, I finally gave in. I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to since before the divorce, Mark. He used to work in the same building as Lauren. Different department, but close enough that they crossed paths. We weren't best friends, but we were friendly. Grabbed drinks a few times, talked enough that it wouldn't feel completely out of nowhere for me to text him. I kept it simple. Hey, random question. Do you still work at the same company? He didn't respond right away, which gave me just enough time to question what I was doing. But then my phone lit up. Yeah, still here. What's up? I stared at the screen for a second before typing again. You remember Lauren and Eric? The typing bubble showed up almost instantly. Yeah, hard to forget that situation. My chest tightened a little. Can I ask you something honestly? I wrote. Sure. I paused, then just went for it. How long were they actually together before everything came out? There was a longer delay this time, long enough that I could feel my heartbeat start to pick up. Then his response came through. Man, you sure you want to know? That answer alone told me everything I needed to brace for. Yes, I typed. Another pause. Look, I don't know everything for sure, he wrote, but people started noticing stuff way before it became obvious.
Like, over a year, at least. I felt something drop in my stomach. Over a year? I replied. Yeah, he said. At first, it was just small things. Them always leaving together, inside jokes, disappearing during lunch. Then it got more obvious. People were talking about it months before anything was confirmed. Months before confirmed. I leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling like I had that day Jason told me about her wedding. Except this time it felt different. This wasn't just about how fast she moved on. This was about how long I had been in the dark. She told me it was 8 months, I wrote. Mark responded almost immediately. Yeah, I don't think that's right, man. Of course it wasn't. I closed my eyes, trying to piece it together. A year, maybe more. That meant while I was still sitting across from her at dinner, talking about our week, while we were still making plans, still living our life, she was already building something else. Not just emotionally drifting, actively choosing someone else, for longer than I ever realized. Did people know she was married? I asked. Yeah, Mark replied. That was part of why it was such a big deal. I let out a slow breath. So it wasn't just a quiet betrayal. It was a public one. Not in my world, but in hers, in the place where she spent most of her time. And somehow, I was the only one who didn't see it. Or maybe I just didn't want to. I thanked Mark, told him I appreciated him being honest, and ended the conversation there. But I didn't feel any sense of closure. If anything, it made everything heavier. Because now I wasn't just dealing with what happened. I was dealing with the realization that my understanding of it had been incomplete, sanitized, edited down to something easier for her to say. 8 months sounds bad. A year and a half sounds intentional, deliberate, like a second life. I didn't reach out to her, even after all of that, even with everything in me wanting to ask her why she lied about something like that, because I already knew the answer. It was easier. Easier to say 8 months, easier to make it seem like something that spiraled out of control, instead of something she chose over and over again for a long time. And honestly, at that point, I didn't need her explanation anymore. It wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't give me anything back. All it would do is pull me back into a conversation that had already taken too much from me. So I let it sit, not peacefully, but firmly. And over the next few weeks, something shifted again. Not in a dramatic, life-changing way, just quietly. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way mornings felt in that apartment when the sunlight came through the window just right, the rhythm of the city that I had slowly become part of, the fact that I could go an entire day without thinking about her, and when I did think about her, it didn't hit as hard. It was like the truth, as ugly as it was, finally closed a loop in my head. There was no more what if, no more trying to understand her decisions from a place of confusion. She made choices, a lot of them,
For a long time. And those choices didn't include me. That's it. Simple. Not easy, but clear. One night I was back at the bar with Daniel, sitting in our usual spot, the noise of the room blending into something comfortable again. He glanced at me and said, "You seem different." I smirked slightly. "Different how?" "Lighter," he said. "Not completely, but less like you're carrying something around all the time." I thought about that for a second. "Yeah," I said. "I think I finally stopped trying to figure it out." He nodded. "That'll do it." We sat there for a while, just drinking, talking about nothing important. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't mentally somewhere else. I was just there, present. Later that night, walking back to my apartment, I passed by one of those storefront windows that reflects just enough of you to make you look twice. I stopped for a second. Not because I didn't recognize myself, but because I did. Just not the same version. I looked like someone who had been through something, but also someone who had kept going. And maybe that's the part I didn't fully understand before. I thought leaving the country was about running away. From her, from the memories, from everything that went wrong. But standing there, in a city that had nothing to do with my past, I realized it wasn't about running. It was about choosing something else. A different life. One that wasn't defined by what she did or who she chose. I don't know what her life looks like now. I don't check. I don't ask. As far as I'm concerned, that chapter is closed. Not erased. Not forgotten. Just finished. And whatever she built with him, whatever version of happiness they think they have, that's theirs to carry, not mine. I've got my own life now. And for the first time since everything fell apart,